The wind howled through the broken slats of the abandoned barn, carrying with it the bite of Wyoming winter. Clara Rose Dawson pulled her wool coat tighter, though it did little to ward off the cold that had settled deep in her bones months ago. She stood at the edge of Eden Hollow, population 46, watching the sun sink behind the ragged mountains. The vastness of it all should have made her feel small, insignificant. Instead, it only amplified the steady, relentless beating of her heart, a sound that haunted her through every sleepless night. She wasn't afraid of the dark. She was afraid of the way her heart pounded in the silence, reminding her she was still alive when Thomas was not. The wooden sign at the town's entrance creaked on its chains. Eden Hollow, founded 1871. 8 years old, barely more than a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the wilderness. Clara had chosen it precisely because it appeared on no maps back east, because no one here would know her story, because perhaps in this forgotten corner of the territory, she could finally forget too. Her boots crunched through the frost-brittle grass as she made her way down the main street, though main was a generous term for the rutted dirt path that ran between the general store and the saloon. She'd arrived 3 days ago with a single trunk, her medical texts wrapped in oilcloth, and a heart so weary she wondered if it might simply stop one day from exhaustion. "You the new doc?" a woman's voice called from the boarding house porch. Clara paused, adjusting the weight of her medical bag. "I'm a nurse, ma'am. Clara Dawson." The woman, round-faced and silver-haired, studied her with the frank assessment common to frontier folk. "Martha Henderson. I run the boarding house. Heard tell you were setting up in the old feed store." "Yes, ma'am. I hope to establish a small clinic." Martha snorted. "Hope's about all we got out here. Miss Dawson, that and stubbornness. You got much of the latter." "Enough," Clara replied, though she wasn't certain it was true. She'd used up so much stubbornness just getting here, leaving behind the suffocating sympathy of Philadelphia society, the well-meaning relatives who looked at her with such pity it made her skin crawl. "Well then," Martha said, "you'll need more than that coat. Wyoming winter's got teeth. Stop by later. I'll see what I can spare." Clara nodded her thanks and continued toward the feed store. It sat at the town's edge, a squat building with gaps between the boards wide enough to see through. The previous owner had died of pneumonia last winter. Martha had mentioned it with the casual acceptance of death that marked frontier living. Clara understood that acceptance. Death was as much a part of life out here as breathing. Inside, the space was bare except for scattered hay, mouse droppings, and a broken chair. Clara set down her bag and surveyed what would become her clinic. The roof leaked in 2 places. The door hung crooked. The windows were covered with oiled paper instead of glass. It was perfect in its imperfection, as broken as she felt. She'd been working for an hour, sweeping out the worst of the debris, when she heard the thud of something heavy hitting the doorframe. A man stood silhouetted against the late afternoon light, holding a small wood stove in his arms as if it weighed nothing. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and rough as frontier whiskey. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his left temple down to his jaw. Dark hair hung past his collar, and his eyes she couldn't quite make out their color in the dim light, but they studied her with an intensity that made her heart skip. Then, race. Thank you, but I didn't order." "Martha sent me." He stepped inside, setting the stove down carefully. "Said you'd freeze otherwise." "She's right." Clara watched him survey the space. His movements economical, purposeful. There was something in the way he held himself, a guardedness she recognized from the soldiers she'd tended during the war. Men who'd seen too much and trusted too little. "I'm Luke Calder," he said finally, not offering his hand. "I run mail between here and Cheyenne. Fix what needs fixing when I'm in town." Clara Dawson. She kept her own hands clasped in front of her, suddenly aware of how they trembled not from cold, but from that persistent flutter in her chest that had grown stronger since he'd appeared. "I appreciate the help, Mr. Calder, but I can manage." "No, you can't." He said it without judgment, just stating fact. "Temperature's dropping tonight. You'll need wood, too. I'll bring some by." Before she could protest, he was gone, leaving only the smell of leather and winter wind behind. Clara pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the wild rhythm beneath her palm. She'd come here to escape that feeling, the way her body betrayed her by continuing to feel when her mind wanted only numbness. That night in her narrow boarding house bed, Clara lay awake listening to her heartbeat echo in the darkness. 1-2, 1-2, steady as a railroad clock, loud as thunder in the silence. During the war, she'd listened to so many hearts placing her ear against wounded chests, counting beats to gauge if a man would live or die. She'd gotten good at it, that grim arithmetic of survival. Thomas's heart had been strong until the end. Even as the typhoid fever ravaged his body, his heart had fought on. Stubborn and determined, she'd counted every beat in those final hours. Her hand pressed to his chest, willing each one to continue. When it finally stopped, the silence had been deafening. Now, her own heart seemed determined to make up for his stillness, pounding with enough force for 2 people. The doctor in Philadelphia had called it nervous exhaustion, prescribed laudanum and rest. But Clara knew better. It was guilt, pure and simple. Guilt that she lived while Thomas died. Guilt that she'd been the nurse but couldn't save the one person who mattered most. She rose before dawn, giving up on sleep. The boarding house was quiet as she slipped out, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The walk to the feed store, her clinic, she corrected herself, took only minutes. But her fingers were numb by the time she arrived. True to his word, Luke Calder had left a pile of split wood by the door. The stove sat ready to be installed, and beside it, she found something else, a simple wooden cot with a thin mattress, a wool blanket folded at its foot. Clara stood in the doorway, staring at these unexpected gifts. In Philadelphia, such gestures would have come with expectations, social obligations, the complex dance of propriety. Here, she sensed only practicality. A woman alone needed heat and a place to rest between patients. Nothing more. She spent the morning setting up what supplies she'd brought: bandages, her few precious bottles of medicine, the surgical instruments that had belonged to her father. He'd been a doctor, had trained her himself despite society's disapproval. Hands that can heal shouldn't be wasted, he'd said, but her hands hadn't healed Thomas. By afternoon, she had her first visitor, not a patient, but a curiosity seeker. A young woman, perhaps 17, peered through the doorway with bright, inquisitive eyes. "You're really a nurse?" the girl asked. "From back east?" "Yes," Clara said simply. "And you are—" "Sally Morrison. My PA runs the general store." She stepped inside, looking around with obvious fascination. "We haven't had any kind of doctor since old Doc Hennessy died 2 winters back. People just make do, or they don't." The casual acceptance of death again. Clara understood it, even envied it. In the East, death was draped in black crepe and elaborate mourning rituals. Here, it was just another fact of life, like winter snow or summer drought. "I hope to change that," Clara said. "Spread the word that I'm here for anyone who needs help." Sally grinned. "Oh, word's already spread. You're all anyone's talking about. Well, that and—" She stopped abruptly, color rising in her cheeks. "And—" "Nothing, ma'am, just—" Luke Calder doesn't usually help newcomers. Keeps to himself mostly. People are wondering why he's taken an interest. Clara felt that unwelcome flutter in her chest again. Mr. Calder was simply being neighborly. Sally's expression suggested she wasn't convinced, but she didn't press. After she left, Clara tried to focus on organizing her supplies, but her mind kept wandering to the silent man who'd appeared like a frontier ghost, leaving gifts without explanation. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, Clara heard footsteps on the porch. Her heart leaped, then raced before she could command it to be still. But it wasn't Luke Calder who appeared in the doorway. It was a woman, thin and haggard, carrying a bundled child.
"Please,"
the woman gasped.
"my boy, he can't breathe right."
And just like that, Clara was a nurse again, her hands steady, her mind clear. She took the child, perhaps 4 years old, and laid him on the cot. His breathing was labored, wheezing. Croup, most likely. She'd seen it dozens of times.
"I need hot water,"
she told the mother, "and all the clean cloths you can find." As she worked, creating a tent of blankets and steam to ease the child's breathing, Clara felt something shift inside her chest, not the wild pounding that kept her awake, but something deeper, quieter, purpose, perhaps, or maybe just the simple reminder that her hands could still heal, even if her heart couldn't quite remember how to rest. The child's breathing eased as the night wore on. His mother wept with relief, and Clara, for the first time in months, felt the weight on her chest lighten just a fraction. She was still afraid of the dark, still haunted by the rhythm of her own stubborn heart. But here, in this broken-down feed store at the edge of nowhere, she'd found something she'd thought lost forever, a reason to keep counting the beats. The morning after treating the Morrison boy, Clara woke to find Frost painting intricate patterns on her boarding house window. Her first thought wasn't of the cold, but of the child's steady breathing when his mother had finally carried him home. Her second thought, unbidden and unwelcome, was of Luke Calder's scarred face in the lamplight. She dressed quickly in her darkest wool dress, practical, severe, the kind that discouraged questions about why a young woman would choose exile in a place like Eden Hollow. The main street was nearly empty as she made her way to the clinic, just an old prospector leading his mule toward the mountains, and Martha Henderson sweeping her porch with violent efficiency. "Heard you saved the Morrison boy," Martha called out. "He saved himself," Clara replied. "I just helped him breathe easier." Martha's laugh was dry as winter wheat. "That's more than old Doc Hennessy ever did. Man believed whiskey cured everything from croup to broken bones." At the clinic, Clara found fresh footprints in the frost near her door and another pile of split wood, neatly stacked. She stood for a moment, studying the precise way each piece was arranged, the care taken to select dry, seasoned logs that would burn clean. Such attention to detail spoke of a methodical mind, one trained to notice what others might miss. She was examining a patient, Mrs. Garrett, whose persistent cough worried her when the door opened and Luke Calder filled the frame. In daylight, she could see what shadow had hidden before. His eyes were gray as a winter storm, and the scar that marked his face was the kind left by shrapnel or flying metal. A war wound. Then, she'd seen enough of them to know. "Mr. Calder," she said, keeping her voice professionally neutral even as her pulse quickened. "Are you injured?" "No, ma'am." He held a package wrapped in brown paper. "Martha asked me to deliver this." He set the package on her makeshift desk, a plank across 2 barrels, and turned to leave. But Mrs. Garrett's coughing fit stopped him. Clara watched something change in his expression as the older woman struggled for breath, saw his hands clench and release. "Raise her arms above her head," he said quietly. "Opens the airways." Clara did as he suggested, and Mrs. Garrett's breathing eased. When she looked back at Luke, he was already at the door. "You have medical training," Clara said. It wasn't a question. He paused, but didn't turn. "Don't anymore." Then he was gone, leaving Clara with more questions than before. Mrs. Garrett, having recovered her breath, was eager to fill the silence. "Strange one, that Luke Calder," she wheezed. "Came here 2 years back. Keeps to himself mostly. Does odd jobs, delivers mail, fixes what needs fixing. Never seen him at church or the saloon. Some say he's running from something." "Aren't we all?" Clara murmured. Then louder, "Let's listen to your lungs, Mrs. Garrett." But her mind wasn't on the examination. It was on the way Luke's hands had clenched at the sound of labored breathing. the precise medical knowledge delivered in that rough voice, the careful distance he maintained from everyone and everything. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Luke would appear at unexpected times, always with some practical reason, delivering supplies, fixing a loose board, installing proper glass windows to replace the oiled paper. He never stayed long, never accepted her offers of coffee or gratitude. But sometimes Clara would catch him watching her work with a hunger in his eyes that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with recognition. One afternoon, she was treating Sam Hayes, a ranch hand who'd gotten his arm caught in a fence. The wound was deep, requiring stitches. Clara had sewn plenty of wounds during the war, but her hands shook slightly as she threaded the needle, not from inexperience, but from exhaustion. She hadn't been sleeping. Her heart beat too loud in the darkness, her dreams full of Thomas's fever-bright eyes. "You need steady hands for that." She hadn't heard Luke enter. He stood just inside the door, his expression unreadable.
"My hands are steady enough,"
she said, though they both could see the tremor. "When did you last eat?" The question surprised her. She tried to remember. Yesterday, the day before, food had become just another chore, like breathing. Without waiting for an answer, Luke crossed to where Sam Hayes sat white-faced on the cot. "I'll hold him. You sew." It should have been awkward, this sudden intrusion into her work. Instead, it felt natural, the way Luke positioned himself to brace Sam's arm, the quiet encouragement he offered the injured man. Clara found her hands steadying as she worked, her stitches neat and precise. When she finished, Sam stumbled out with mumbled thanks and a promise to pay when he could. Clara began cleaning her instruments, aware of Luke still standing there, watching. "You were a doctor," she said, before. "Before doesn't matter." "It does if you could help these people." His laugh was bitter as winter wind. "I helped enough people die. Don't need to add to the tally." He left before she could respond, but his words stayed with her through the long afternoon. She understood running from the past wasn't that why she was here, but she also understood the weight of unused skills, the guilt of hands that could heal but chose not to. That evening, she found him at the stable, tending to the horses. Eden Hollow's stable was a ramshackle affair, but the horses were well cared for, coats gleaming despite the primitive conditions. "My father was a doctor," she said without preamble. "He taught me everything, even though women weren't supposed to learn such things. During the war, I put that knowledge to use, saved some, lost more." Luke didn't look up from the horse he was brushing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I recognize the look in your eyes, the way you catalog symptoms without meaning to, the way your hands want to help even when your mind says no." She stepped closer, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders. "What happened?" For a long moment, only the sound of the brush against horsehair filled the stable. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "El Paso, field hospital. Ammunition depot exploded during surgery. Killed everyone except me." The words hung between them, stark as bones in the desert. "Including her?" Clara asked gently. His hands stilled. "Including her?" They stood in silence as understanding settled between them. Two people marked by loss, trying to disappear into the vastness of the frontier. Clara felt her heart racing again, but for once, it wasn't from grief or fear. It was from recognition, the strange comfort of finding another soul as wounded as her own. "I dream about it," Luke said suddenly. "The sound, the heat, the way everything went from order to chaos in seconds. I wake up smelling smoke and blood." "I dream about silence," Clara admitted. "The moment a heart stops beating, how loud that quiet can be." Luke finally looked at her then, and she saw in his storm-gray eyes the same haunted exhaustion that greeted her in every mirror. "Is that why you count heartbeats?" he asked. The question startled her. "How did you—" "Saw you once, through the window, hand pressed to your chest, lips moving like you were praying. Recognized the motion. Used to do it myself. After making sure I was still alive when part of me wished I wasn't. Clara's breath caught. No one had ever seen through her so clearly. Not even Thomas. The physicians in Philadelphia had seen a hysterical woman. Her family had seen a tragic figure. But Luke Calder saw the truth, the survivor's guilt wrapped in medical precision. "Yes," she whispered. "I count them. Every night. Too fast, too loud, too insistent. Like my heart is trying to beat for two people." "Gets easier," he said, returning to brushing the horse. "The counting. Eventually. You forget to do it. Then you feel guilty for forgetting. Then that gets easier too." "I don't want it to get easier," Clara said fiercely. "If it gets easier, that means I've let him go." Luke's hands stilled again. "No, it means you've learned to carry him different. Less like a weight, more like a scar. Still there, still part of you, but not killing you anymore." He set down the brush and moved past her toward the door. But he paused at the threshold, not quite looking back. "You did good work today. With Sam, steady hands when it mattered." Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with the horses and the overwhelming urge to weep not from sadness, but from the unexpected relief of being understood. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the familiar race of her heart, but for the first time in months, the rhythm didn't frighten her. That night, she slept for 6 straight hours without waking. When she opened her eyes to the pre-dawn darkness, her first thought wasn't to count heartbeats. It was to wonder if Luke Calder was awake somewhere, fighting his own demons in the dark, and if perhaps that shared battle made them both a little less alone. The sleepless nights returned with a vengeance 3 weeks later. Clara would lie in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling boards, counting the seconds between heartbeats like a child counting stars. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, except instead of wonder, she felt only the hollow echo of exhaustion. It started after she lost her first patient in Eden Hollow, Jacob Thornton, a miner who'd come in with what seemed like a simple fever. She'd treated dozens like it during the war, knew all the right steps, but frontier illness had its own rules. And by the time she recognized the signs of pneumonia, it was too late. She'd sat with him through the final hours, her fingers on his wrist, feeling his pulse fade from racing to threadbare. When it finally stopped, the silence rushed in like floodwater, and her own heart seemed to pound twice as hard in compensation. Martha found her the next morning, still sitting beside Jacob's body, her hand pressed to her own chest. "Child," the older woman said gently, "you can't save them all." "I know," Clara whispered, but knowing and accepting were different things entirely. Word of Jacob's death spread quickly through Eden Hollow. Some folks stopped greeting her on the street. Others watched her with the wary look reserved for things that brought bad luck. Only Sally Morrison still visited regularly, bringing gossip and questions in equal measure. "Pa says maybe we were better off without a nurse," Sally mentioned one afternoon, then quickly added, "But I don't think so. You tried. That's more than nothing." Clara wanted to explain that sometimes trying and failing felt worse than nothing, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she organized her already organized supplies and tried not to think about how her hands had shaken while treating Jacob, how her exhaustion had made her slow to recognize the symptoms. Luke hadn't come by since Jacob's death. She told herself she didn't care, that his absence was just one less complication. But late at night, when her heartbeat thundered in her ears, she found herself wondering if he too had pulled away, deciding she brought more harm than healing. Then came the night of the first real blizzard. Clara woke to howling wind and the boarding house shaking on its foundation. Her small clock read 3 in the morning. She'd managed perhaps an hour of broken sleep, her dreams full of failing hearts and accusing eyes. She rose and dressed, knowing further rest was impossible. The main street was a wall of white when she peered out. Snow fell so thick she couldn't see the building across the way. No one would venture out in this weather, which meant she could sit in her clinic alone, away from Martha's concerned looks and the weight of communal disappointment. She wrapped herself in every layer she owned and fought her way through the storm. The wind tried to push her back with icy fingers, but stubbornness, that quality Martha had asked about, drove her forward. By the time she reached the clinic, her hands were numb and her lungs burned from the cold. Inside, she found Luke. He sat on the floor near the stove, which glowed with warmth. A lantern cast dancing shadows on the walls. He looked up when she entered, but didn't seem surprised to see her. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Clara unwrapped her frozen scarves, her teeth chattering too hard to answer immediately. Luke rose and poured coffee from a pot on the stove. When had he made coffee and pressed the hot mug into her hands? "How long have you been here?" she managed. "Hour or two. Sometimes the stable's too quiet during storms." He settled back on the floor, his long legs stretched toward the stove. "Heard about Jacob Thornton? Then you heard I failed." "Heard you stayed with him till the end. That's not failing." Clara sank onto the cot, exhaustion weighing her down like wet wool. "I should have recognized the pneumonia sooner, if I hadn't been so tired." "When's the last time you got real sleep? Not just lying there counting heartbeats, but actual rest?" She laughed bitterly. "Before Thomas died. Maybe even before he got sick. It's like I forgot how—" Luke was quiet for a moment. "Then, after El Paso, I didn't sleep for 3 months. Not really, just these little fragments where exhaustion won for a few minutes. Kept seeing their faces every time I closed my eyes. Kept hearing the explosion." "What changed?" "Almost died." His voice was matter-of-fact. "Fell asleep in the saddle. Horse spooked, threw me into a ravine, broke 3 ribs, dislocated my shoulder. Had to lie there for 2 days before someone found me. Funny thing about pure physical pain, it drowns out the other kind for a while. That's not exactly a recommended treatment plan." "No, but lying there, hurting too much to think straight, I realized something. The dead don't care if we suffer. They're beyond all that. We're the ones who decide to carry them like millstones or memories." Clara stared into her coffee, watching steam rise and dissipate. "Sometimes I can't tell the difference." That's the exhaustion talking. Everything's heavier when you can't sleep. Guilt grows teeth in the dark. They sat in companionable silence as the storm raged outside. Clara found herself studying Luke's profile in the lamplight, the way shadows pooled in the hollows beneath his eyes. He looked as tired as she felt. Yet here he was at 3 a.m, offering coffee and understanding. "Why did you really come here tonight?" she asked. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Saw your light go out at the boarding house. Then saw you fighting through the storm. Figured anyone fool enough to walk in this weather was either running to something or from something. Either way, didn't seem right to let you do it alone." "So you broke into my clinic. Door wasn't locked, and I brought my own coffee." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch toward a smile. Very considerate for a burglar. "I prefer concerned citizen." The wind gusted hard enough to rattle the windows. Clara shivered, and Luke added more wood to the stove. As he did, she noticed the careful way he moved, the slight hitch in his left side. "Are your ribs still bothering you from the fall?" "Some days, cold makes it worse." He resettled on the floor. "But it's a useful reminder. Pain means you're alive. Means you survived another day, whether you meant to or not." "I'm not sure I want to survive," Clara said quietly. "Not if it means feeling like this forever. Like I'm drowning in my own chest." Luke looked at her then. Really looked. And she saw her own bone-deep weariness reflected back. "It doesn't last forever," he said. "The drowning feeling. One day you'll wake up and realize you're floating instead. Then eventually you'll find shore. When? Different for everyone. But it starts with sleep. Real sleep. Even if you have to trick your body into it." "How?" He stood and retrieved something from near the door, a book she hadn't noticed before. "Sometimes reading helps. gives your mind something to follow besides the circles it wants to run. Other times, he hesitated, then moved to sit on the floor near the cot. This might sound strange. Strange is relative at 3 in the morning in a blizzard. True. He leaned his back against the cot's frame. Sometimes it helps to have someone else count for you. Takes the responsibility away. You can just listen and drift. Clara's heart, already racing from exhaustion and caffeine, skipped erratically.
Are you offering?
If you want, no expectations. Just one person who can't sleep trying to help another. She should have said no. Should have maintained the careful distance that protected what was left of her heart. Instead, she found herself lying back on the cot, still fully dressed, pulling the wool blanket to her chin.
All right,
she whispered. Luke shifted slightly, and when he spoke, his voice was low and steady as distant thunder. 100, 99, 98. He counted backwards slowly, evenly, his voice becoming part of the storm's rhythm. Clara closed her eyes and tried to follow the numbers down into darkness, somewhere around 70. She felt her chest begin to loosen. By 50, her heartbeat had slowed to match the cadence of his voice.
At 30,
she murmured. Why backwards? Harder to anticipate. Keeps your mind from racing ahead. He continued counting. 25, 24. Clara felt herself drifting, the exhaustion that had been her enemy becoming something softer, more welcoming. Luke's voice anchored her to the present, away from the endless loop of memory and regret. She didn't remember him reaching 0. When she woke, pale winter dawn filtered through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving the world muffled in snow. Luke still sat on the floor, his head tipped back against the cot, dozing lightly. His hand rested near hers on the blanket, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth. For the first time in months, Clara had slept without dreams, without counting, without drowning. She lay still, not wanting to wake him, and marveled at the strange turn her exile had taken. She'd come to Eden Hollow to disappear, to fade into the frontier's vastness. Instead, she'd found someone who understood the weight of survival, who offered not sympathy but solidarity. When Luke stirred and opened his eyes, she met his gaze steadily. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded and rose stiffly, favoring his left side. "Storm's passed. I should check on the horses." But he paused at the door, looking back. "Same thing happens tonight. You come find me. Stable's warmer than here anyway." After he left, Clara sat up slowly, taking inventory of how she felt. Still tired. Yes, still heart-sore. But the drowning feeling had receded, leaving her wrung out but breathing. She pressed her hand to her chest and felt her heart beating steady, regular, unremarkable. For the first time since Thomas died, the silence didn't terrify her. The abandoned feed store began to transform into something resembling a proper clinic over the following weeks. Clara couldn't say exactly when it started, perhaps the morning she found a small table outside her door with a note reading, "For your medicines," in Luke's careful script. Or maybe when Sally Morrison arrived with her mother's old curtains, insisting the windows needed a woman's touch. But it was Luke who did the heavy work, always when she wasn't there. She'd leave in the evening to find a loose floorboard, and return in the morning to find it fixed. The gaps between the wallboards slowly disappeared, stuffed with mud and straw. A proper door replaced the crooked one. Each improvement appeared like frost on glass silently, overnight, without explanation. Clara understood this was his way. Luke Calder spoke through actions, not words, and his actions said what his voice could not, that he believed in what she was trying to build, even when the town remained skeptical. One morning, she arrived to find him on the roof, patching the last of the leaks. "You'll fall and break your neck," she called up. "Then you'll have a patient," he replied without looking down. "I prefer my patients conscious and complaining. Thank you." She saw his shoulders shake slightly, a laugh, perhaps, though she'd never heard him truly laugh. The closest he came was a softening around his eyes, a slight upturn of his scarred mouth. Inside, she discovered his latest edition shelves along one wall, sturdy and well-crafted. Her medicine bottles would no longer sit in precarious rows on the windowsill. She was arranging them when Mrs. Garrett arrived with her daughter, Emma, who clutched a cloth to her hand.
Kitchen knife slipped,
Mrs. Garrett explained. It's deep. Clara unwrapped the wound carefully.
Emma, perhaps 12 years old, bit her lip but didn't cry.
The cut ran across her palm, bleeding freely but missing the major vessels lucky.
This will need stitches,
Clara said.
It'll hurt some.
Emma nodded bravely. Clara was preparing her supplies when Luke climbed down from the roof and appeared in the doorway. He took in the situation with a quick glance. I can hold her hand, he offered quietly to Mrs. Garrett. The other one, sometimes it helps to squeeze something.
Mrs.
Garrett looked uncertain. Luke's reputation as a loner preceded him, but Emma spoke up.
Yes, please.
Luke pulled up a stool and offered his hand to the girl. His hands were large, calloused from work, but gentle as he showed Emma how to grip.
When it hurts, you squeeze as hard as you need,
he told her. I've got strong hands. You won't hurt me. Clara began stitching, keeping her movements swift and sure. Emma gasped at the first pierce of the needle, but squeezed Luke's hand instead of pulling away. You're doing well, he said. Brave as any soldier I've known.
You knew soldiers?
Emma asked, clearly trying to distract herself.
A few.
Were they scared? All the time, but they did what needed doing anyway. That's what courage is, being scared but not letting it stop you. Clara tied off the last stitch and began bandaging the wound. She found herself watching Luke with Emma, the way his gruff demeanor gentled for the child. This was who he'd been before. She realized, a healer. Someone who understood that medicine was as much about comfort as cure. After the Garretts left, Luke stood to go as well.
Stay,
Clara said impulsively.
I have coffee.
He hesitated, then nodded. She poured 2 cups from the pot on the stove. She kept one going constantly now, a habit learned from him. You were good with Emma, she said. Children are easier. They're honest about being afraid. Unlike adults. Adults pretend, makes everything harder. He stared into his coffee. In the field hospital, the young soldiers were like that, trying to be brave, dying silent. I learned to watch for the ones who admitted they were scared. They usually lived longer. Is that why you helped today, old habits? Maybe. He set down his cup and moved toward the shelves, running a hand along the wood. Or maybe I'm tired of being useless. You're not useless. You deliver mail, fix things. I waste what I know. The words came out harsh, self-directed. All that training, all those years learning how to save lives. And I used none of it, because I'm too much a coward to risk failing again. Clara rose and crossed to where he stood. Up close. She could see the fine lines around his eyes, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. It's not cowardice to protect yourself from pain, she said softly. Isn't it? He turned to face her, and the raw honesty in his eyes made her breath catch. I watch you work yourself to exhaustion trying to help these people, and I do nothing but build shelves. What kind of man does that make me? A surviving one. Surviving isn't living. Clara. Her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. He'd always been formal before Miss Dawson or ma'am. This felt like a door opening between them. Then help me, she said. Not all the time, not officially, but when I need steady hands or someone who understands what to do when things go wrong. Be my extra pair of hands, nothing more. He was quiet for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, I can't be responsible for lives again. I can't make those decisions. You wouldn't be, I would, you'd just be helping, like today with Emma. Something shifted in his expression, not quite acceptance, but a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. I'll think about it, he said finally. That evening, Clara found herself humming as she updated her patient records. It was such an unexpected sound that she stopped, startled. When had she last hummed before Thomas fell ill? Certainly, the melody felt rusty in her throat, but she let it continue, a tentative exploration of something that wasn't grief. Martha noticed the change too. "You look better," she observed when Clara came for supper. "Getting more sleep." "Some?" Clara admitted. She didn't mention the nights when exhaustion still won, when she found herself at the stable door and Luke would count her into sleep without question or comment. Those moments felt too fragile to share, too precious to expose to daylight scrutiny. Over the next week, Luke began appearing at the clinic more frequently. Never when other patients were there, he seemed to have an instinct for avoiding crowds. But when Clara was alone, organizing supplies or updating records, he'd arrive with small offerings: a better lamp, a leather-bound ledger for patient notes, a thick buffalo hide for the door to keep out drafts. "Where do you find these things?" she asked one afternoon. "Here and there. People pay me in goods sometimes for deliveries. Been saving things that might be useful." "For 2 years." He shrugged. Didn't have much else to do with him. Slowly, she began to understand the depth of his isolation. 2 years of existing on the edges of Eden Hollow, speaking only when necessary, touching no one except horses and mail packages. The stable was his refuge, but also his prison, a place to hide from the doctor he'd been and couldn't bear to be again. Then came the night that changed everything. Clara was closing the clinic after a long day when hoofbeats thundered down the main street. A rider pulled up hard outside, nearly falling from his saddle. "Fire at the Hutchinson place," he shouted. "People trapped." The Hutchinson ranch was 5 miles out. Clara grabbed her medical bag and ran for the stable. Luke was already saddling 2 horses with practiced efficiency. "You don't have to come," she said. "Yes, I do." His tone brooked no argument. They rode hard through the darkness, following the orange glow on the horizon. The scene that greeted them was chaos. The main house engulfed in flames, people running with buckets that seemed pitiful against the inferno. "My daughter, Mrs." Hutchinson screamed. "She's still inside." Without hesitation, Luke plunged toward the burning building. Clara's heart seized as he disappeared into the smoke. Long seconds passed. Then he emerged, carrying a small form wrapped in a wet blanket. He laid the child, maybe 6 years old, on the ground away from the heat. She wasn't breathing. "Clara!" His voice cut through the chaos. She ran to them, dropping to her knees. The girl's face was soot-stained but unburned smoke inhalation. Then, Luke was already positioning the child's head, clearing her airway with movements that spoke of muscle memory never truly forgotten. "You have to do it," Clara said, recognizing what was needed. "You know how." For a heartbeat, she saw naked fear in his eyes. Then his training took over. He breathed for the child, steady and controlled, while Clara monitored her pulse. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. "Come on," Luke muttered. Again. Then a cough, a gasp. The girl's eyes fluttered open. The crowd that had gathered erupted in cries of relief. "Mrs." Hutchinson sobbed as she gathered her daughter close. But Clara only had eyes for Luke, who sat back on his heels, hands shaking, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. "You saved her," Clara said softly. "We saved her," he corrected. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "I'd forgotten what that felt like." They stayed until the fire was controlled, treating burns and smoke inhalation. Luke worked beside her without hesitation now. The wall he'd built finally breached. As dawn broke over the charred remains of the house, Clara realized something had fundamentally shifted. They rode back in exhausted silence. At the stable, Luke dismounted and stood holding his horse's reins, not quite meeting her eyes. "I'm not ready to be a doctor again," he said. "Maybe I never will be." "I'm not asking you to be." "But I could
Help sometimes, when you need me. Clara felt her tired heart lift. That would be good. He nodded and turned to tend the horses. As she walked back to the boarding house, Clara realized she wasn't counting her heartbeats, somewhere between the fire and the sunrise. She'd forgotten to listen for them, and for the first time, that forgetting didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like healing. The fever came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the fire. Clara first noticed it while treating old Henry Morse's rheumatism, a slight tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with exhaustion, a warmth climbing her spine like smoke up a chimney. She told herself it was nothing, just the strain of too many long days. By Wednesday morning, she could barely stand. Martha found her collapsed on the boarding house floor, burning with fever and muttering incoherently about hearts that wouldn't stop beating. The older woman's face creased with worry as she helped Clara back to bed. "I'll fetch someone," Martha said. "No," Clara managed through chattering teeth. "I'm fine, just tired." But Martha was already at the door. "You stay put, or so help me. I'll tie you to that bed myself." Time became elastic after that. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, lost in fever dreams where Thomas called her name and wounded soldiers asked why she hadn't saved them. Sometimes she was back in Philadelphia, sometimes in the war hospital, sometimes drowning in an endless sea of heartbeats that thundered like cavalry charges. She surfaced briefly to find Luke sitting beside her bed, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. His face was grave, the scar more pronounced in the lamplight. "Can you hear me?" he asked. She tried to speak but only managed a weak nod. "It's fever, maybe influenza, maybe something else. You need to fight. Clara, don't go where I can't follow." The desperation in his voice pierced through her delirium. She wanted to tell him she wasn't going anywhere, but the fever pulled her under again. In her dreams, she stood in a vast field of snow. Thomas was there, whole and healthy, smiling the way he used to before the sickness took him. "You don't belong here yet," he said gently. "I'm so tired," she told him. "My heart won't let me rest." "That's because it's not beating just for you anymore." He gestured behind her. "Someone's counting on you to keep going." She turned but saw only swirling snow. When she looked back, Thomas was fading. "Live, Clara. It's what hearts are for." She woke to find sunlight streaming through the window and Luke asleep in the chair beside her bed. His hand rested near hers on the blanket, fingers just touching. He looked haggard, stubble darkening his jaw, clothes rumpled as if he'd been there for days. When she shifted slightly, his eyes snapped open, alert despite the exhaustion written in every line of his face. "Clara!" Her name came out like a prayer. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by horses." Her voice was hoarse, throat raw. "How long?" "3 days. Your fever broke last night." He poured water from a pitcher, helping her drink. "You had us all worried." "You stayed." A faint color touched his cheeks above the beard. "Someone needed to. Martha's been helping, and Sally too, but..." He trailed off, suddenly finding the water pitcher fascinating. But I know what it's like to wake up alone after the fever breaks, when you're not sure if you're alive or dead, and no one's there to tell you which." His voice was quiet, matter of fact, but Clara heard the echo of old pain. She studied him in the morning light. This man who'd walked through fire, both literal and metaphorical. His shoulders were broad enough to carry the weight of his past, but she could see how it bent him, made him careful in ways that had nothing to do with physical injury. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded and stood, stretching stiff muscles. "I should tell Martha you're awake. She'll want to force soup down your throat." "Luke," he paused at the door. "Did you count them my heartbeats?" His smile was small but real. "Everyone. They stayed strong, even when you didn't." After he left, Clara lay still, taking inventory of her body. Weak, yes, shaky, certainly,
but alive in a way that felt different from mere survival. The fever had burned through her like wildfire, leaving her scoured clean. For the first time in over a year, her heart felt like it belonged solely to her. Martha bustled in with soup and scolding in equal measure. "Running yourself ragged, that's what did it. You're no good to anyone, dead girl." "Yes, ma'am." And that Luke Calder, sitting here day and night like a sentinel, had to practically force him to eat. Martha's eyes gleamed with speculation. Man doesn't do that for just anyone. Clara focused on her soup, unwilling to examine that observation too closely. But she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest, different from fever. Sweeter than medicine. Sally visited that afternoon, full of news. "Everyone's been asking about you, even folks who were standoffish before. Mrs. Hutchinson especially. She says you and Mr. Calder saved her Annie's life, and she won't hear a word against either of you." "That's kind of her." "It's more than kind. She's been telling everyone how Mr. Calder breathed life back into Annie when she was gone, how you worked together like you'd been partners for years." Sally leaned forward conspiratorially. "Is it true he was a doctor before?" "That's his story to tell, not mine." Sally nodded, understanding the boundary. "Well, whatever he was, folks are seeing him different now. And you too. It's like the town finally decided you belong." That evening, Luke returned with a small package. "Medicine?" Clara asked. "Not exactly." He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small brass bell. "For beside your bed, in case you need something and can't call out." It was practical, thoughtful, and somehow more intimate than flowers or poetry could have been. Clara turned the bell over in her hands, noting the careful polish, the clear tone when she rang it gently. "I won't always be able to come," Luke said quietly. "When I'm on mail runs or—" "I understand." She met his eyes. "But you'll come when you can." "Yes." They sat in comfortable silence as dusk painted the room in soft grays and purples. Clara found herself studying his hands where they rested on his knees, capable hands that had healed and failed, destroyed and rebuilt. Hands that had counted her heartbeats through fever-dark nights. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Why did you count them my heartbeats?" Luke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I needed to know you were still here. Because the counting gave me something to do besides remember all the ones I couldn't save. Because—" He stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. Because somewhere between that first night in the blizzard and watching you work yourself into the ground trying to heal this town, you became necessary to me." The words came out rough, as if pulled from some deep place. "I didn't mean for it to happen, didn't want it to, but there it is." Clara's heart, that traitorous organ that had thundered through so many sleepless nights, now seemed to pause, holding its breath. "Is that such a bad thing?" she asked softly. "Being necessary to each other. It is when you've already lost everyone who mattered." His voice was bleak. "I can't, Clara. I can't go through that again. Watching someone important fade away." She reached out, covering his hand with hers. His skin was warm, calloused, real. "I'm not fading. I'm right here." He turned his hand palm up, fingers intertwining with hers. "You almost weren't these 3 days. But I am, and you're here, and maybe that's enough for now." He squeezed her hand gently, then stood to leave. "Rest, real rest, not that half sleep you usually manage. Martha's threatened to sit on you if you try to get up too soon." "She wouldn't." "She would. I've seen her do it to cowboys twice her size." Clara laughed, actually laughed, and the sound surprised them both. It felt rusty but genuine, like a door opening after a long winter. After he left, she lay back against the pillows, one hand pressed to her chest out of habit, her heartbeat steady and strong, no longer the frantic messenger of grief, but simply the rhythm of being alive. She thought about Luke's words, about being necessary to each other, and wondered if this was how healing truly happened.
Not in grand gestures or sudden revelations, but in small moments of connection that slowly stitched two broken people back together. The brass bell sat on her bedside table, catching the last rays of sunlight. She didn't ring it, didn't need to, but knowing it was there, knowing he would come if she called, made all the difference. That night, for the first time since Thomas died, Clara fell asleep without counting anything at all. Recovery was slow, measured in small victories. First, sitting up without dizziness. Then, walking to the window. Finally, a week after the fever broke. Clara made it down the boarding house stairs on her own, though her legs trembled like a newborn colt's. Luke was waiting at the bottom with Martha, both wearing identical expressions of disapproval. "Too soon," they said in unison, then looked startled at their synchronization. "I'm fine," Clara insisted, though she gratefully accepted Luke's arm when he offered it. "I need to check on the clinic. There must be patients." "All handled," Martha interrupted. "Between Sally and me, we've managed the simple cases, and Luke here's been taking care of anything more serious." Clara looked at Luke in surprise. He shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Just basic things," he said. "Wound cleaning, fever reduction, nothing that required real decisions." But Martha snorted. "Modest fool. He diagnosed Ben Carter's appendix trouble and convinced him to take the train to Cheyenne for surgery. Saved the man's life, most likely." Luke's jaw tightened. "Anyone could have seen the signs." "Anyone with medical training," Clara said softly. "Thank you." He helped her to the porch chair, where she could sit in the weak spring sunshine. The snow had begun melting while she was ill, leaving muddy streets and the promise of warmer days. Eden Hollow looked different, somehow softer around the edges, less like a place of exile and more like what it might actually be home. "I should get back to the stable," Luke said. "Mail run tomorrow." "How long will you be gone?" 3 days, maybe 4 if the roads are bad." He hesitated. "Will you be all right?" "I've been taking care of myself for a long time. Luke." "I know." His gray eyes held something she couldn't quite name. "That's what worries me." After he left, Martha settled into the chair beside her. "That man's got it bad." "Martha." "Don't Martha me, girl. I've got eyes. The way he looked at you while you were sick, like you were the only thing tethering him to this earth. And you're no better. Watching him walk away like he's taking the sun with him." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. "It's complicated. Love always is. That's what makes it worth having." "Who said anything about love?" Martha's laugh was knowing. "Child, you can lie to yourself all you want, but don't insult my intelligence. I've seen enough love stories to recognize one taking shape." That evening, Clara managed to walk to the clinic with Sally's help. Everything was indeed in order, better than she'd left it. Actually, the supplies were meticulously organized, patient records updated in handwriting that wasn't hers. Luke's work, clearly. Each entry precise and thorough despite his claims of only handling basic things. "He was here every morning before his regular work," Sally said, "and every evening after. Wouldn't take payment from anyone. Said it was just neighborly help." Clara traced a finger over his neat script, noting how he'd documented each case with the attention to detail that marked a true physician. Whatever demons he fought, his instincts remained intact. The next morning, she watched from her window as Luke prepared for his mail run, checking saddle straps and pack balance with methodical care. He looked up once, catching her at the window, and touched his hat brim in farewell. She raised her hand in response, fighting the urge to call him back, to ask him to stay just one more day. But she didn't, because Martha was right. She'd been taking care of herself for a long time. She didn't need Luke Calder. She just wanted him. The distinction felt important, revolutionary even. With Thomas, there had been need born of youth and assumption. Of course they would marry. Of course they belonged together, the way spring followed winter. But this thing growing between her and Luke was choice.
deliberate and conscious despite all the reasons it shouldn't happen. The 3 days of his absence stretched like taffy. Clara returned to work gradually, seeing patients for short periods. Resting between, the town's attitude had indeed shifted. Where before there had been wariness, now she found acceptance. Mrs. Hutchinson brought fresh eggs. Ben Carter's wife delivered a pie with thanks for Luke's diagnosis. Even the taciturn blacksmith nodded when she passed. On the second night, unable to sleep, Clara found herself at the stable. The horses nickered softly in greeting, and she breathed in the familiar sense of hay and leather that she'd come to associate with safety. Luke's small room at the back was neat as a pin, barely lived in. A medical text sat on the single shelf Gray's Anatomy, well thumbed. She wondered if he read it at night, keeping his knowledge sharp despite his protests of leaving medicine behind. The third evening brought unexpected rain, turning the roads to mud. Clara tried not to worry, but by the fourth morning, anxiety gnawed at her. Mail runs weren't dangerous, usually, but usually didn't account for swollen rivers or horses losing footing on muddy trails. She was attempting to focus on organizing supplies when hoofbeats sounded outside. Through the window, she saw Luke dismounting, mud splattered and moving stiffly. Relief flooded through her so sharply it made her dizzy. He entered the clinic, water dripping from his coat. "Sorry I'm late. Creek was flooded. Had to go around." She crossed the room without conscious thought, drawn by something stronger than reason. He froze as she approached, eyes widening slightly. "Clara." She reached up, fingertips barely grazing the scar on his jaw. "I was worried." "I'm fine, just wet and tired." "I know, She struggled for words. "These past few days, I kept thinking about what you said, about being necessary to each other, and I realized something." He stood very still, water still dripping from his hair. "What's that?" "I've been so afraid of my heart beating too fast, too hard, too much. But when you were gone, it barely beat at all, like it was waiting for you to come back to set the rhythm again." His hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his face. "Clara, I know you're scared. I am too, but maybe that's all right. Maybe being scared together is better than being brave alone." For a long moment, they stood frozen in that fragile space between friendship and something more. Then Luke turned his head, pressing his lips to her palm in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "I don't know how to do this," he said roughly. "I've forgotten how to be close to someone without expecting them to disappear. Then we'll remember together, or learn new ways, or make it up as we go." She smiled tremulously. "I'm a quick study, and you're nothing if not thorough." That surprised a laugh from him, short and rusty, but real. "You make it sound simple." "No, but I'm tired of complications keeping us from what's right in front of us." He drew her closer, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His arms came around her, solid and warm despite the dampness of his clothes. She rested her head against his chest and heard his heartbeat, steady and strong, a perfect counterpoint to her own. "Can you feel my heart?" she whispered, echoing that night in the stable that seemed a lifetime ago. His hand splayed across her back, and she felt his smile against her hair. "Every beat. I think I've been counting them since the day you fell in the snow." They stood there as rain pattered against the windows. Two people who'd come to Eden Hollow to disappear, finding instead that they'd become essential to each other's reappearance. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, too much scar tissue remained for that. But it was a beginning, tentative and precious. When Luke finally pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes held something that hadn't been there before: hope. "Stay for supper?" Clara asked. "Martha's making stew, and she always makes too much. Trying to fatten me up. Someone needs to—" "You're too thin for a Wyoming winter." "It's almost spring," he pointed out. "Then you're too thin for a Wyoming spring. Come on, let's get you dry clothes before you catch your death." As they walked toward the boarding house together, Clara realized she hadn't thought about Thomas once during their conversation. The recognition brought not guilt, but a quiet sense of rightness. Her first love would always be part of her history, written in the early chapters of her heart. But Luke complicated, scarred. Necessary Luke was her present, and maybe, if they were both brave enough, her future. "Clara," Luke said as they reached the porch. "I'm glad you were worried. I'm glad I came back. I'm glad." He paused, then finished simply, "I'm just glad." She squeezed his hand. "So am I." And for two people who'd thought their hearts too damaged to try again, gladness was more than enough. It was everything. The Peterson family lived 8 miles out of town, in a homestead carved from stubborn earth and harder dreams. When their eldest boy rode in at dawn, his horse lathered with sweat, Clara knew before he spoke that something was terribly wrong. "It's my sister, Mary," the boy gasped. "She's burning up. Can't keep nothing down. Ma says to come quick." Clara was already gathering supplies when Luke appeared in the doorway. He'd been fixing the clinic's new shutters, another of his quiet improvements, but now his face held that particular stillness she'd learned meant he was calculating odds. "I'll saddle the horses," he said. "You don't have to." 8 miles is too far alone if you need to work on the way back." His tone brooked no argument. 5 minutes. They rode hard through the morning mist, medical bags secured to their saddles. The Peterson homestead was typical of the region, a soddy house built into a hillside, small but clean. Mrs. Peterson met them at the door, her face etched with worry. "Thank God you've come. She's been sick 3 days now." Inside, Clara found 10-year-old Mary Peterson delirious with fever, her neck stiff, a telltale rash beginning to bloom across her skin. Clara's heart sank as she recognized the symptoms. "Luke," she said quietly, and he was beside her immediately. Their eyes met over the child's bed, sharing the same grim diagnosis. "Meningitis," he murmured. She nodded. "We need to work fast." What followed was a dance of shared knowledge and instinct. Without discussion, they fell into complementary rhythms, Clara preparing medications while Luke examined the child more thoroughly, his hands gentle but sure. When Mary convulsed, they moved as one to protect her from injury. "The other children," Clara said suddenly, "they need to be isolated." Luke was already heading for the door. "I'll handle it." She heard him speaking to Mr. Peterson, his voice calm but urgent, explaining the need to keep the other children away. Through the window, she watched him organize the family with quiet efficiency, transforming chaos into order. The hours blurred together. Clara lost track of time, focused only on the child's labored breathing, the careful administration of what medicines they had. Luke appeared and disappeared like a steady ghost, bringing fresh water, clean cloths, updates on the other children who so far showed no symptoms. Sometime past noon, Mary's fever spiked dangerously. Clara felt desperation clawing at her chest. They were so far from any hospital, with so few resources. "We need to bring it down now," she said. Luke didn't hesitate. "Cold bath. I'll get snow from the root cellar." They worked together to cool the child's burning skin, Luke supporting Mary's head while Clara sponged her down. The girl cried weakly, a sound that paradoxically brought relief she was still fighting. "That's it," Luke murmured to the child. "You're strong, just like your ma. Just keep fighting, little one." Clara glanced at him, struck by the tenderness in his voice. This was who he'd been before tragedy reshaped him, a healer who saw patients not as problems to solve but as people to save. By evening, Mary's fever had dropped slightly. She was sleeping now, her breathing less labored. Clara sat back, exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. "You should rest," Luke said. "I'll watch her." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking." He guided her to a chair. "Sleep an hour. I'll wake you if anything changes." She must have dozed, because suddenly Luke was shaking her shoulder gently. The room was dark, except for lamplight. "Her fever's breaking," he said, and Clara heard wonder in his voice. "Look!" Mary's skin was damp with perspiration, the good kind, the kind that meant a body winning its battle. The girl's eyes fluttered open, focusing with clarity for the first time in days. "Mama," she whispered. "Mrs." Peterson flew to her daughter's side, tears streaming. "Mr." Peterson pumped Luke's hand with desperate gratitude while the other children peered around the doorframe, eyes wide with relief. It was past midnight when they finally prepared to leave. Mary was sitting up, sipping broth. The crisis passed. Mrs. Peterson walked them to their horses, clutching Clara's hands. "I don't know how to thank you, both of you. They say in town that Mr. Calder was a doctor once, a real good one. Seeing you two work together..." She wiped at her eyes. "It's like watching something meant to be." On the ride back, Clara and Luke traveled slowly, exhaustion making speed impossible. The moon was full, turning the landscape silver and strange. "You were remarkable today," Clara said. "The way you handled everything, the family, the treatment. You didn't hesitate once. Neither did you. But I never stopped practicing. You did, for 2 years. You've kept that part of yourself locked away." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then it felt different today. "How?" "Before, in the war, every patient could be the one I lost. Every decision carried the weight of potential failure. But today," he paused, searching for words. "Today I wasn't alone in it. When I started to doubt, you were there. When you needed support, I could give it. It was like sharing the weight made it bearable." Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Is that such a revelation that you don't have to carry everything alone?" "For me, yes." His voice was wondering. "I've been alone with it so long. I forgot there was another way." They rode in companionable silence until the lights of Eden Hollow appeared at the stable. Luke helped her dismount, his hands lingering on her waist. "Thank you," she said, "for coming with me, for being there, for..." He silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. "No, thank you for reminding me why I became a doctor in the first place, for showing me it's possible to be broken and still be useful." "You're not broken," Clara said firmly. "You're mending. There's a difference." In the moonlight, she saw his eyes glisten suspiciously. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "See me better than I see myself. The same way you see me, I think, with eyes that understand what healing looks like." He drew her closer, resting his forehead against hers. They stood there in the stable doorway. Two people who'd saved a child's life by saving each other first. "Will you work with me again?" Clara asked. "Not all the time, not officially. But when cases like this come, when I need someone who understands..." "Yes," he said simply. "Yes to all of it." The next morning, word of Mary Peterson's recovery spread through Eden Hollow like wildfire. But it wasn't just the child's survival that had people talking. It was the way the town's reclusive mail carrier had transformed into a physician when needed, working seamlessly with their Eastern nurse. Sally was bursting with excitement when she visited the clinic. "Everyone's saying you two were like a medical ballet, knowing what the other needed without words. Mrs. Henderson says it's better than any doctor we've had alone." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We just did what was necessary." "Maybe, but Pa says necessity's got a way of showing us who we really are." Sally grinned. "And apparently, who you two really are is partners." After Sally left, Clara found herself pondering that word, partners. It felt right in ways that went beyond medicine. She and Luke had found a rhythm together, a way of being that enhanced rather than diminished who they were individually. That evening, Luke appeared with dinner stew from Martha and fresh bread from the baker's wife. "Figured you'd forget to eat," he said, setting the food on her desk. "Again." "I was going to..."
No, you weren't. But his smile took any sting from the words. I know you. Clara Dawson. When you're thinking about patience, food becomes optional. They ate together in comfortable quiet, and Clara realized this too had become part of their rhythm. Small, caretaking gestures that said what words couldn't quite capture. I've been thinking, Luke said as they finished, about what Mrs. Peterson said, about us being meant to work together. And maybe she's right. Maybe we're better together than apart, in all ways. He met her eyes steadily. I know I am. Clara's heart, that organ that had caused her so much grief, now swelled with something that felt dangerously close to joy. So am I, she admitted. Better, with you. He reached across the small space between them, taking her hand. Then let's stop pretending otherwise. Outside, night was falling over Eden Hollow, bringing with it the promise of more challenges, more patience, more life to be lived. But inside the clinic, two people who'd come to the frontier to escape their pasts were finally ready to build a future together. One saved life at a time. The petition arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by Silas Morton with the pompous air of a man who believed himself righteous. Clara read it slowly, her hand steady despite the cold anger building in her chest. We, the undersigned citizens of Eden Hollow, respectfully request that Miss Clara Dawson cease her medical practice and consider relocating to a more suitable environment. Her influence on certain members of our community has proven disruptive to the moral fabric of our town. 23 signatures. Not a majority by any means, but enough to sting. She recognized the names mostly wives of the town council, a few shopkeepers who'd never warmed to her, and, surprisingly, Dr. Josiah Winters, a physician from Cheyenne who visited monthly and had always seemed cordial. This is about Luke, she said, not a question. Silas shifted uncomfortably. It's about propriety. Miss Dawson, an unmarried woman spending so much time with a man of questionable reputation. Questionable? Clara's voice could have frozen flame. The man who saved Annie Hutchinson, who diagnosed Ben Carter's appendicitis, who just 2 days ago helped save Mary Peterson. That's just it, Silas pressed on. He's practicing medicine without a license, and you're encouraging it. Some folks think you're a bad influence on him, pulling him back into something he walked away from for good reason. What reason would that be? Silas had the grace to look ashamed. Well, nobody knows exactly, but there's talk about why he left Texas, about people dying. Clara set the petition down carefully, afraid she might tear it otherwise. I see, and naturally, rather than ask him directly, you've all decided to whisper behind closed doors and judge what you don't understand. There's also the matter of impropriety. You've been seen entering the stable at night. He visits your room when you're ill. It's not decent. Get out. Clara's voice was quiet but final. Take your petition and get out of my clinic. After Silas scurried away, Clara sank into her chair, the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on her. She'd been naive to think acceptance would last, to believe that doing good work would be enough. Luke found her there an hour later, still staring at the petition. He read it silently, his jaw tightening with each line. I'll leave, he said when he finished. This is my fault. They're using me to get at you. Don't you dare! Clara stood, fury giving her strength. Don't you dare let them chase you away! Clara, be practical. Your work here matters. I'm just the man who's saved lives alongside me. Just my partner. She moved closer, close enough to see the pain in his gray eyes. Just the person I love. The words hung between them, surprising them both. Clara hadn't meant to say it not like this, not in anger, but it was true, had been true for weeks now, growing quietly beneath the surface of their partnership. Luke's breath caught. Clara, I know we haven't said it, haven't even really talked about what this is between us, but I'm tired of pretending, tired of being careful.
She touched his face, feeling the familiar roughness of his scarred jaw. "I love you," Luke called her, questionable reputation and all. He caught her hand, holding it against his face. "You can't mean that. You don't know what I've done. Why I really left Texas." "Then tell me. Trust me with it. Let me decide what I can live with." For a moment, she thought he'd pull away, retreat into the silence that had protected him for 2 years. Then his shoulders sagged, and he sank into a chair. Her name was Catherine, my fiancée. She was visiting the field hospital where I worked, bringing supplies to the soldiers. She had the most beautiful smile, lit up the whole tent. His voice was distant, lost in memory. The ammunition depot was a 1/4 mile away. Should have been safe, but a spark from somewhere campfire. Cigarette, we never knew, and it went up like the 4th of July. Clara sat quietly, letting him speak at his own pace. "The blast threw burning debris everywhere. The hospital tent caught fire instantly. I tried to get everyone out, but there were so many, and the smoke was so thick, I kept going back in, pulling out whoever I could find. But I couldn't find Catherine. I looked and looked, and then the tent collapsed." His hands clenched and unclenched rhythmically. "They found her body 3 days later. She'd been trying to help evacuate patients. Died doing what I should have been doing if I'd been at my post instead of outside checking supplies. 23 people died that day. Clara, 23 people I was responsible for." "Luke?" "The official inquiry cleared me, said it wasn't negligence, just terrible timing. But I knew better. If I'd been where I was supposed to be, if I'd seen the fire start sooner, if I'd found Catherine first." He looked up at her with haunted eyes. "I couldn't practice after that. Couldn't make life and death decisions when my last ones had led to so much death." Clara knelt before his chair, taking his clenched hands in hers. "You saved people that day too. How many did you pull from the fire?" 8, maybe 9. 8 lives that would have been lost without you, and all the lives you've saved since, even when you thought you'd stopped practicing. Annie Hutchinson, Mary Peterson, countless others you've helped without taking credit. It doesn't balance the scales." "No," Clara agreed. "Because that's not how scales work. Each life stands alone, sacred, irreplaceable. The ones lost don't make the ones saved worth less. And punishing yourself forever doesn't bring anyone back." Luke's hands turned in hers, gripping tightly. "How can you look at me the same, knowing what I failed to do?" "Because I see what you choose to do now. Every day. You choose to help, even when it hurts. That's not the action of a coward or a failure. That's courage." He pulled her up, into his arms, holding her like she might disappear. "I don't deserve you." "Good thing love isn't about deserving. Then..." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "The question is, do you love me too enough to stay and face this town's gossip? Enough to build something real together?" His answer was in the kiss he pressed to her forehead, gentle and reverent. "I've loved you since that night you asked if I could feel your heart. Maybe before. I just didn't think I had the right." "You have the right. I give it to you freely." They held each other in the quiet clinic. 2 people who'd found love in the last place they'd thought to look for it. Outside, Eden Hollow went about its business, unaware that inside, something fundamental had shifted. "So what do we do about the petition?" Luke asked eventually. Clara smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "We call their bluff. There's a town meeting tomorrow night. They want to air their grievances. Let them, but they'll do it to our faces, not behind closed doors." "Clara, that could get ugly." "Then it gets ugly. I'm through running from hard things. Luke, are you..." He studied her face, then slowly smiled a real smile that transformed his usually stern features. "No, I think I'm through running too." The next evening, the town hall was packed. Word had spread that the Eastern nurse and the mysterious mail carrier would be attending, and curiosity won over propriety for many folks. Silas Morton stood at the front, petition in hand, clearly enjoying his moment of authority. We're here to discuss concerns about the moral influence of certain individuals on our community. Then discuss them. Clara stood, her voice carrying clearly. But first, I have some questions. Dr. Winters, I see your signature here. May I ask why? The Cheyenne physician shifted in his seat. It's nothing personal, Miss Dawson, but I have concerns about unlicensed individuals practicing medicine. Like when you misdiagnosed Mrs. Baker's pneumonia as dust allergies, or when you told Sam Hayes his broken arm would heal straight without setting it properly. Clara's voice was calm, clinical. Both cases that Mr. Calder correctly diagnosed and treated, saving Mrs. Baker's life and Sam's livelihood. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Furthermore, Clara continued, I find it interesting that your concerns arose only after I declined your offer to partner in a private practice in Cheyenne, just as Mr. Morton's concerns coincidentally appeared after I refused to support his bid for mayor. More murmurs, louder now. Luke stood beside her. If you have questions about my past, ask them. But know this, every person I've helped in Eden Hollow, I've helped because Miss Dawson showed me it was still possible to do good despite past failures. If that's a bad influence, then I'll take it. But the impropriety, someone called out. What impropriety? Martha Henderson stood, formidable in her indignation. A man and woman working together to save lives, caring about each other, since when is that improper? They ain't married, Silas sputtered. Then maybe they should be, Martha shot back. Seems to me the only scandal here is folks with too much time and too little charity, trying to run off the only medical help we've got. The meeting dissolved into arguments, some supporting Silas, others defending Clara and Luke. But Clara noticed something significant. The voices in their defense were louder, more numerous. Finally, Mayor Thompson called for order. Let's settle this democratic-like, all in favor of accepting the petition. 20 hands rose fewer than had signed, Clara noted. All opposed. A forest of hands shot up 40, 50, maybe more. Motion fails. The mayor announced, Miss Dawson and Mr. Calder are welcome to stay and continue their work, and if I might add, we're lucky to have them. As the crowd dispersed, Annie Hutchinson's mother approached. Don't mind the busybodies. Miss Clara, for every one of them, there's 3 of us who know what really matters. You and Mr. Calder save lives. The rest is just noise. Outside, in the cool evening air, Luke took Clara's hand. That was brave. That was necessary. She squeezed his fingers. Though Martha's suggestion about marriage is worth considering, Luke finished. If you'll have me, questionable reputation, dark past and all. Clara's heart, that faithful organ that had caused her so much grief, now beat strong and sure. I thought you'd never ask. I'm asking now. Marry me, Clara. Let them gossip about that. She answered with a kiss that left no doubt, there under the Wyoming stars, and somewhere in the watching crowd. Martha Henderson smiled and muttered, About time. The storm struck without warning on a late March evening, winter's last violent gasp before spring. Clara was closing the clinic when the temperature plummeted and snow began falling in thick, angry sheets. By the time she reached the boarding house, visibility had dropped to mere feet. Where's Luke? Martha asked, peering out the frosted window. His mail run was supposed to bring him back today. Clara's stomach clenched. He might have sheltered somewhere along the route. Maybe. But Martha's tone held the same worry Clara felt. Spring storms were the worst wet, heavy snow that could disorient even experienced travelers. By morning, the blizzard had worsened. Drifts reached halfway up the buildings, and the wind howled like a living thing. Still no sign of Luke. I'm going to look for him, Clara announced, pulling on her heaviest coat. In this, Martha gestured at the white fury outside. You'll die before you get a mile out. Then I'll die trying. Clara's voice was fierce.
I won't sit here wondering if he's freezing somewhere, wondering if I could have what died alongside him. Martha gripped her shoulders. Child, think. What would Luke want you to do? Clara knew the answer. Luke would want her safe, would be furious at the thought of her risking herself. But knowing didn't stop the desperate need to act, to do something besides wait. The day crawled by in agonizing increments. Clara tried to work, but her hands shook too badly to be useful. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Every creak of the building made her heart leap with false hope. By evening, the storm had begun to exhaust itself, though snow still fell steadily. Clara stood at the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass, when she saw it, a shadow moving through the white. She was out the door before Martha could stop her, plunging into knee-deep snow. The shadow resolved into a horse, head hanging low, ice crystals coating its mane, and slumped in the saddle. Luke. He was barely conscious, lips blue with cold, ice forming where his breath met the frigid air. Clara grabbed the reins, leading the exhausted horse to the stable. Luke swayed dangerously, and she had to half pull, half carry him from the saddle. Couldn't see, he mumbled. Horse knew the way. Smart horse. Shh, save your strength. She got him inside the stable, out of the wind. His clothes were frozen stiff, his skin pale as the snow outside. Clara's medical training took over even as her heart hammered with fear. Hypothermia, severe. He needed warmth, but gradually too fast could kill him. Need to get you warm, she said, already working at his frozen coat buttons. Clara. His eyes focused with effort. The families, along my route, I stopped, made sure they had supplies before the storm. That's why I'm late. Of course he had, even with a blizzard bearing down. Luke had thought of others first. Clara felt tears sting her eyes as she worked to remove his wet clothes, wrapping him in horse blankets. You magnificent fool, she whispered. You're a fool, he corrected with a weak smile. She built up the fire in the small stove, then settled beside him, sharing her body heat. His skin was like ice against hers, and she could feel the violent shivers racking his frame. Need you to stay awake? She said. Talk to me. About what? Anything. Tell me about Texas. Before the war, happy things. His voice was slurred with cold, but he tried. Had a dog, stupid mutt named General, followed me everywhere. Tried to follow me to medical school. He trailed off, eyes drifting closed. Luke, she shook him gently. What happened to General? Gave him to my sister, probably fat and spoiled now. His eyes opened again. Clara, if I don't you dare finish that sentence. Her voice cracked. You're not dying in this stable. We have a wedding to plan. Remember? Bossy woman. You're bossy woman. Slowly, painfully, slowly. Warmth returned to his body. The violent shivering gave way to occasional tremors. His lips lost their blue tinge when he could finally hold a cup. Clara made him drink warm water, then broth she'd heated on the stove. It was near dawn when Luke felt strong enough to make it to the boarding house. Clara supported him every step, both of them moving like invalids through the snow. Martha met them at the door with blankets and scolding that barely masked her relief. Fool man, riding in that weather, she muttered, helping Clara get Luke to her room. Propriety be damned. What were you thinking? I was thinking, Luke said with dignity slightly undermined by chattering teeth, about the Connor family with new twins, and old Mr. Jameson alone in his cabin, and the widow Martinez with barely any wood split. Martha's scolding softened. Fool man, she repeated, but gently. Clara spent the next 3 days nursing Luke through the aftermath, the fever that followed extreme cold, the cough that settled in his chest. She slept in the chair by his bed, waking every time his breathing changed rhythm. On the third night, she woke to find him watching her. You look terrible, he said softly. You nearly died, she replied. I think I'm entitled to look terrible. He reached out, fingers tangling with hers. I'm sorry. I knew the storm was coming, but I thought I had time. To help everyone else first. She squeezed his hand. I know. It's who you are. I love you for it, even when it terrifies me. When I was out there, lost in the white, all I could think about was you. How I'd promised to marry you but hadn't yet. How I might die with you thinking I'd abandoned you like... He stopped, swallowing hard. Like Thomas did, not by choice, but still. Clara moved to sit on the bed beside him. I know, but you didn't die. You came back. The horse came back. I just held on. Then thank God for smart horses. She touched his face, still too pale but wonderfully alive. Luke, I need you to understand something. I will always worry when you're gone. That's the price of loving someone. But I'd rather have that worry than not have you at all. He turned his head to kiss her palm. Can you feel my heart? Clara placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady thump beneath her fingers. Every beat. Good. Keep counting them. I plan on there being a lot more. The next morning, Luke felt well enough to sit up and eat solid food. Word had spread through the town about his near-death experience and the families he'd helped before the storm. A steady stream of visitors came by, bringing food and gratitude. Saved our lives. Mister, Connor said simply, baby in each arm. We'd have run out of fuel for sure without the extra wood he brought. Checked on me even though it meant riding into the storm. Mister, Jameson added, not many would do that for a cranky old man. Clara watched Luke accept their thanks with his usual uncomfortable grace, and felt her heart swell with pride and love. This man, who thought himself broken beyond repair, who believed he'd failed everyone who mattered, he couldn't help but save people, even at risk to himself. That evening, as the visitors finally thinned out, Sally Morrison appeared with a grin. So, she said brightly, when's the wedding? Because Ma says if you two don't set a date soon, she and Martha are going to plan it for you. Clara looked at Luke, who was trying not to laugh. What do you think, should we let them... God help us. No. He reached for Clara's hand. How about next month when the snow's gone and the wildflowers are blooming? A spring wedding, Clara mused. New beginnings. Exactly. Sally clapped her hands. I'll tell everyone, oh, this is so romantic. You saved him from freezing. He saved you from loneliness. You both saved the whole town. Sally, Clara interrupted gently. Breathe. The girl laughed and rushed out, undoubtedly to spread the news. Luke shook his head. By tomorrow, the whole territory will know. Good, Clara said firmly. I want everyone to know you're mine. He pulled her close, and she felt his heart beating strong against her chest. Outside, the last of the winter snow was melting, making way for spring. Inside, two people who'd thought their hearts too damaged for love were proving that sometimes the most broken things, when mended together, become the strongest. I love you, Luke murmured against her hair. I know, Clara replied. I can feel it in every heartbeat. And for once, that steady rhythm brought not anxiety but peace, the promise of all the beats yet to come, counted together. Spring arrived in Eden Hollow with a rush of wildflowers and warm Chinook winds that swept away the last stubborn patches of snow. The clinic, once a broken-down feed store, now bore a new sign that Martha had commissioned from the local carpenter, Dawson and Calder Healing Hands. Clara traced the letters with her fingertips, still marveling at how far they'd come. It's not official yet, Luke reminded her, appearing in the doorway with fresh lumber. Not until next week. The marriage or the partnership. Both. He set down the wood and wrapped his arms around her from behind. Though, in my mind, they've been official since that night you asked if I could feel your heart. Clara leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest. Through the window, she could see Eden Hollow going about its morning business, Mrs. Garrett hanging laundry, Sally Morrison helping at her father's store, riders heading out to the ranches. It was an ordinary scene, made extraordinary by the fact that she no longer watched it as an outsider. The Reverend stopped by earlier. She said, "Wanted to confirm we're ready for Saturday." "What did you tell him?" "That we've been ready since the day we met. We just didn't know it yet." Luke turned her to face him, and she saw in his gray eyes the same wonder she felt. They'd both come to Eden Hollow to disappear, to nurse wounds they thought would never heal. Instead, they'd found each other, and in finding each other, found themselves. The week passed in a blur of preparations. True to Sally's prediction, Martha and Mrs. Morrison had taken charge of the wedding planning with military efficiency. Clara's protests that they wanted something simple were cheerfully ignored. "Simple?" Martha snorted. "After what you two have been through, no ma'am. This town's going to celebrate properly." And it seemed the whole town agreed. Gifts appeared daily at the clinic preserves from ranch wives, a quilt from the church ladies, tools from the men who'd watched Luke risk his life in the storm. Even Silas Morton, shamefaced after his petition's failure, contributed a set of medical texts he'd ordered from Denver. The night before the wedding, Clara couldn't sleep, but this time it wasn't her racing heart that kept her awake. It was anticipation, pure and sweet. She found herself at the stable, knowing Luke would be there. He was sitting outside, watching the stars, without words. She settled beside him, and he wrapped a blanket around them both. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "Never. You—" "Only that we didn't do this sooner." He was quiet for a moment. "I have something for you." From his pocket, he produced a small leather journal, worn but well cared for. "This was my medical journal from before," he explained. "I stopped writing in it after El Paso. Couldn't bear to document anything when it all ended so badly. But I've been thinking maybe it's time to start again. New pages for a new life." Clara opened it carefully. The first half was filled with his neat handwriting case notes, treatment plans, the meticulous records of a dedicated physician. The pages stopped abruptly, leaving the rest blank. "We could use it for the clinic," Luke continued. "Document our cases together. Build something worth remembering." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "It's perfect." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring vows and celebration, but tonight was theirs alone, two hearts beating in quiet synchronization, no longer desperate or lonely, just peacefully alive. The wedding day dawned clear and warm. Clara wore her mother's dress, altered by Mrs. Morrison to fit. Luke waited at the church in his best suit, the one he'd worn precisely twice since coming to Eden Hollow. When Clara walked down the aisle on Mayor Thompson's offered arm, she saw Luke's eyes widen, then fill with the kind of joy she'd once thought neither of them would feel again. The ceremony was simple, as they'd wanted, but the church overflowed with townspeople. Even the families from outlying ranches had come, making it the largest gathering Eden Hollow had seen in years. When Reverend Davis asked for the rings, little Annie Hutchinson, fully recovered and proud of her role, stepped forward with the simple gold bands they'd chosen. "Do you, Luke, take Clara to be your wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live?" Luke's voice was strong and certain. "I do." "Do you, Clara, take Luke to be your wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live?" Clara thought of all the heartbeats she'd counted in darkness, all the nights she'd thought love was behind her forever. "I do. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss that sealed their union was tender, a promise of all the days to come. The church erupted in cheers that could probably be heard in Cheyenne.
The celebration that followed filled the town hall and spilled into the street. There was dancing and music, more food than anyone could eat, and enough well-wishes to last a lifetime. Clara watched it all with a kind of amazed joy, her hand never leaving Luke's. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the newlyweds slipped away to the clinic. Someone, Martha, probably had decorated it with wildflowers and ribbons, transforming the medical space into something magical. "Our kingdom," Luke said, gesturing at the supplies and equipment that represented their shared calling. "Our home," Clara corrected, because home wasn't a place, it was the person standing beside you when the storms came. They'd decided to live in the rooms above the clinic, leaving the stable for the horses and Luke's mail-route supplies. As they climbed the stairs to their new living quarters, Clara paused. "Can you feel my heart?" she asked, echoing that long-ago night when she'd been drowning in grief. Luke placed his hand over her heart, then guided her hand to his. It's beating with mine." "Good," Clara said. "Keep counting them." "Every beat," he promised, "for the rest of our lives." That night, as Eden Hollow settled into sleep, Clara lay beside her husband. The words still felt wondrous, and listened to their synchronized breathing. No longer did she count heartbeats to assure herself she was alive. Now she simply felt them, strong and steady, a rhythm of love rather than loss. Through the window, stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over two broken people finding their way to each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patience, new life to shepherd into the world. But tonight, Clara Rose Calder and Luke Calder were simply two hearts beating as one, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal when tended with love. The journal Luke had given her lay on the bedside table, waiting for their first entry together. Clara smiled, already knowing what she'd write. "Today begins the rest of our lives. Today, our hearts beat not in desperation, but in celebration. Today, we are home." Asterisk. And in the quiet of their wedding night, with spring blooming all around them and the future stretching ahead full of promise, Clara finally understood what her heart had been trying to tell her all along. It hadn't been beating too fast or too hard. It had simply been waiting for the right rhythm, the right partner, the right moment to synchronize with another and create something larger than either could manage alone. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I know," Luke replied, pulling her closer. "I can feel it in every heartbeat." And that, Clara thought as sleep finally claimed her, was the greatest miracle of all. Not just surviving, but truly living. Not just healing, but helping others heal. Not just finding love, but building it, day by day, beat by beat, into something strong enough to weather any storm. In Eden Hollow, Wyoming, in a clinic that had once been a broken-down feed store, two hearts that had known too much loss finally found their rhythm. And they lived not perfectly, but purposefully. Not without challenges, but never again alone. Together. Thank you so much for listening to this heartwarming Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Luke's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Please share in the comments below where you're listening from. I love connecting with listeners from around the world and hearing your thoughts about the story. If you enjoyed this tale of healing and second chances, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these frontier romances. Your support means everything and helps me continue bringing you more authentic stories from the American West. Until next time, partners.